Okay, good evening. So we'll continue with the next session in the class from Jeremiah. I hope this recording comes out the way it's supposed to. And what I want to do today, we're actually not going to look very much at Jeremiah at all, because we're going to look at the death of Josiah. Now, the death of Josiah, obviously, we read about mostly in the in the Book of Kings and in the Book of Chronicles. Now, before we do that, I do want to sum up the previous chapter. Last time we had this prophecy about don't have children, right? Jeremiah is not supposed to take a wife, not supposed to build a family because of the situation that he's in, right? And so there's an important question, which I think we started to hit on, which is, and we've kind of gone back and forth on it, which is, what is the decree final? Is the decree sealed, right? Mm-hmm. Or is there still some sort of, sense of hope, wiggle room, sense of hope, mitigating the decree? I mean, again, we've seen back and forth. We've seen that Jeremiah is obviously wants hope, wants there to be hope, wants there to be a change, but doesn't really have so much confidence, right? We wonder if, we don't know, we haven't really seen any interaction with Josiah at all, but Josiah certainly is on the right track. So how is it possible that this decree is so final? So there's a really interesting midrash that's brought in the Talmud in Masechet Brachot, and it's an encounter between Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, and Isaiah. And the encounter takes place as Hezekiah is on his deathbed. Right? Meaning we all know, right? Isaiah was in Jerusalem right along with him. We've talked about that multiple times, about what happens to Hezekiah, right? And Jerusalem is saved, etc. So he gets sick, and he's getting close to death, and he calls for Isaiah. And there's a verse, right? And the verse, sorry, I don't know if this is a verse or not. It says, right, but the Talmud says, right, so said, this is what Isaiah said to Hezekiah. Ko amar Hashem, tzav leveitcha ki meta tav lo tichei. No, it's got to be a verse. I just don't see where it's from. There's no reference to it. I don't recognize it, right? Tell your house that you're going to die and that you won't live. So the Talmud says, you already died. What do you mean you're going to die and not live? Okay, so what does that mean? It means you're going to die and you're not going to live in the world to come. Right? Again, leaving all those questions aside, right? So Hezekiah says, why am I being punished? What did I do? All right, what's so terrible? So Isaiah says, because you didn't engage in procreation, right? You didn't raise a family. You didn't have any children. And Hezekiah says, yeah, because I saw through Ruach HaKodesh, through the Divine Spirit, that my children were going to be evil, right? I was only going to have terrible sons, so I didn't have any, right? I knew that that's what was going to happen. So Isaiah says, listen, the hidden things are God's, right? And you're supposed to do what you're commanded to do. You're commanded to engage in procreation. That's what human beings are supposed to do. You're supposed to do it. So Hezekiah says, okay, good. Give me your daughter for a wife. And maybe between your merits and my merits, maybe we'll have a child who's now, again, he's close to death, so we're not going to go into that detail, but okay. Right. But right, so maybe maybe we'll get a worthy offspring, right? And Isaiah says, you can't change that. Your son is going to be evil. That decree has already been sealed. So Hezekiah says, get out. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Because what I learned from my father, it's interesting though, because he misunderstood, right? He thought he didn't realize that he was doing the wrong thing. He didn't realize it was because the decree was who was sealed. He just saw from the divine spirit this is what's going on. He says, this is what I learned from my father. Right? Even if the sword is on your neck, you still have to believe in the possibility of mercy. You still have to try for mercy. So, fascinating, right?
Quite a midrash.
It's quite a midrash, right? I mean, this is, it's spectacular. I know, I think I've used spectacular probably more than any other word as we do this class, but okay. Right? You can't, right? Meaning there's, at least this midrash says the decree is never sealed, right? There's always room. There's always an opening for repentance, right? When is it? What is it? How much? We don't know those details, right? So Jeremiah, who's, right, at the same time, right, feeling like the decree is sealed, but also loves his people and wants the people to be saved. How do we think he might respond? I'm not sure, right? But it's an interesting midrash Rabbi Lau brings us here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Indeed.
So now we're going to go to the death of Josiah, right? And Rabbi Lau's I believe his PhD is in history, and he's actually a historian in addition to a Talmudic scholar. So
which really helps in this case.
What really helps in this case, because what he brings us here is the Babylonian chronicle of what happened. Right? It's just an interesting background, right? In 614 BCE,
okay,
the Medes conquer the Assyrian city of Ashur, and they make an alliance with Bavel. Right? Madai, Parasu Madai, right? The Medes. I think I'm pronouncing it right. In 612, Nineveh surrenders to an army of the Babylonians and the Medians. Okay. In 609, the Pharaoh Necho, or Nocha,
right,
in Egypt, who has an alliance with Assyria, who's pledged to come to Assyria's defense, heads up to the Euphrates, to the area of the Euphrates to help Assyria. And he needs to pass through Israel, right? We know that about Israel, right? It's in the middle of everything, right? You can't take a plane, you have to go through.
Exactly.
Okay, so he goes through Israel, and he meets Josiah and his army in Megiddo. Right? So the question is, right, and this is attested in the Babylonian sources, from what I understand, and perhaps even the Egyptian sources. Right? So the question, of course, is, what's Josiah doing? Right? Nobody's attacked them. Nobody is after the Jews for a change. He can sit pretty. He can just all they want is safe passage, right? Leave them alone. One superpower is heading to another superpower to defend them from a different superpower. And what happens? Josiah goes to Megiddo and intercepts him. And that's where he dies. He dies in this battle.
Right.
So the question is, why? So, in order to understand that a little bit, we're going to jump around. Right? I mean, at some level, we have to think about what Josiah wants. Right? Josiah believes that his reform is going to be successful. Right? We're going to see in a minute. He's not aware of what Jeremiah is seeing, but he's quite proud. I mean, I'm not trying to say that he was a proud person, but he feels that he's accomplishing something. Not only that, we've already seen, and we've heard this before, this idea that Josiah really wants to reunite the two kingdoms, really wants to make Judah and Israel one kingdom again, and perhaps even become one of the powers to be reckoned with. So he thinks, if I can intercept this, right, maybe I can get the Babylonians on my side, right? Because they say, for some reason I think of like the Lord of the Rings, one of those battles where, one city comes to defend another city and the castles, the big fort is under attack, right? And they all come in on white horses. And okay, so They come in, right? If I can, so that's what Egypt is doing for Assyria. But if Josiah can prevent that, then Babylonia can say, this is an ally. Okay, maybe we'll take care of them. Okay, so let's look for a minute. Like I said, we're going to jump around a little bit. Look, see if we can find the book of Nahum, right? One of the Tresar. Very short book, right? 3 chapters, right? It comes after Micha and before Habakkuk. Right? Got it?
Believe it or Ripley, I got it.
Right? And Nahum writes about the fall of Nineveh. Right? I mean, the first words, Masa Nineveh, right? The burden of Nineveh.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Look in chapter 2, starting in verse 4.
Got it.
The shield of his mighty men is made red, the valiant men are in scarlet, the chariots glitter with steel in the day of his preparation, and the spears of cypress wood are brandished. The chariots shall rage in the streets, they shall jostle one against another in the squares. They seem like torches, they run to and fro like lightnings. He remembers his valiant men, they stumble in their walk, they make haste to his wall, and the screen is prepared. The gates of the rivers are opened, and the palace is dissolved. It is set up, she is uncovered. She is carried away, and her maidens moan as with the voice of doves drumming on their breasts. But Nineveh is like a pool of water long established, yet they flee away. Halt, halt, they cry, but none turns back. Right? This is what's going on in the book of Nahum. Right? I mean, it's a lament, so to speak, about Nineveh. But there's a verse earlier on that perhaps tells us something else, right? That's the again. By the way, I should mention that if you look up Nahum, you'll find that there are questions about whether Nahum even lived in Israel or whether he was even a Jewish prophet, because he seems to have almost nothing to do, right? He seems. I don't believe that's the consensus, right? But like Bilam, right? He can talk about the Jews, but he's not there, right? He's wholly external.
Right.
Right? Look at verse 9 of chapter 1 for a minute. What do you contrive against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. Right? This is, you have to understand what what God's plan is, and God's plan does not matter. I shouldn't say God's plan. God's plan is not for Israel and Judah to be involved in the empires. Okay? This maybe is the warning, right? Meaning, don't think that you can get involved in things that don't belong to you. Right? That line of Nahum, Rabbi Lau at least understands that again. I mean, there's is that does Josiah know of Nahum? Not clear. Okay, but right, but that idea says something about what Josiah should be thinking. Now, the death of Josiah himself is found in 2 places, as I said. It starts we have a very terse description in Kings 2, with 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 29. Right? It's one verse. Right? It doesn't tell us anything else. Right? Then we're going to see the description in Chronicles, which gives us a little bit more detail. Right? 29. 2 Kings 23, 29. Right? V'yamav ala Paro necho melech Mitzrayim al melech Ashur al nahar Prat v'yelech melech Yoshiyahu likrato v'yamiteu b'migido kirototo. Right? In those days, the Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, went to the king of Assyria on the Euphrates River, and King Josiah went to him, and he Necho killed him in Megiddo when he saw him. That's it, right? That's what Kings tells us. Now look in 2 Chronicles, and like I told you, jumping around. 2 Chronicles chapter 35. starting in verse 20. Okay, I've got an English here. You probably have a different English, right? After all this furbishing of the temple by Josiah, right? I mean, we've just described all the things that he did good, right? All the good things he did. After all this furbishing of the temple by Josiah, King Necho of Egypt came up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. Necho sent messengers to him, saying, "What have I to do with you, king of Judah? I do not march against you this day, but against the kingdom that wars with me, and it is God's will that I hurry." Right? Now, the Hebrew word there for God's will, right, is the Elohim Amar Levahaleni. Right? God, it is God's will that I hurry. Just keep that in the back of your head for a minute. Refrain then from interfering with God who is with me, that he not destroy you. But Josiah would not let him alone. Instead, he donned his armor to fight him, heedless of Necho's words from the mouth of God. And he came to fight in the plain of Megiddo. Archers shot King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, "Get me away from here, for I am badly wounded." His servants carried him out of his chariot and put him in the wagon of his second in command and conveyed him to Jerusalem. There he died and was buried in the grave of his fathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem went into mourning over Josiah. Jeremiah composed laments for Josiah, which all the singers, male and female, recited in their laments for Josiah, as is done to this day. They became customary in Israel and were incorporated into the laments. The other events of Josiah's reign and his faithful deeds are in accord with the teaching of the Lord, and his acts, early and late, are recorded in the book of Kings of Israel and Judah. Amazing, right? Don't bother me! Here it's explicit, right? Pharaoh says, "I don't want anything to do with you. I'm not coming to do anything to you. Leave me alone." But even more amazingly, he says, "It's God's will that I keep going, that you let me go." So, and by the way, the part of the book of Eicha. If you look even in the art scroll, if Art Scroll's watching this, I'm going to get in trouble. But anyway, all right, okay. But Art Scroll mentions, even the Art Scroll Tanakh points out that I believe it's the 4th chapter of Jeremiah is a lament, is a eulogy for Josiah, right? That's right. Traditionally, Jeremiah wrote the book of Eicha, and so traditionally that's part of what it is. But there is a fascinating. There's a fascinating, again, midrashic and even apocryphal parallel, right? And when I say apocryphal, I mean the Apocrypha, right? There's a book of the Apocrypha called the Apocryphal Ezra. It's known as Apocryphal Ezra, or I think it's Babylonian Ezra, or I forget exactly how some of them describe it, right? And that book suggests in talking about this situation, says that Me'et el ha'Elohim, right, that I sought from God, is Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah told Pharaoh that it was his will, right? That there was God's will that he go through, right? And of course, what's going to happen, right? I mean, the Assyrians are not going to survive, okay? And Eicha Rabbah, right, the Midrash on Eicha brings the same Midrash, the same idea, right? But expands on it a little bit, right? Eicha Rabbah brings it, and brings in the same idea, right? And it says, El divrei nechob me'et Elohim zeir Yirmiyahu, right? That these words of Necho, right, from God is Yirmiyahu, right? Because who else do you go to, right? And he's not going to go to Huldah because Huldah is the court prophet, right? But he goes to Jeremiah because Jeremiah is around. So he goes, right? Pharaoh comes through. And that's pretty much all we know from the text, right? I mean, we've already got the midrash, right? I mean, the text tells us it doesn't tell us why Josiah goes out, right? Just tells him he does, and he gets done. Okay, we don't know why. So the Talmud, in another absolutely fantastic turn, gives us a Talmudic discussion between Jeremiah and Josiah. Right? So what is and it's based on. It comes in the tractate of Ta'anit, right? In a discussion of there's a halacha, right? The Mishnah says that you have to if a sword is coming through the land, right? War is coming through the land. You have to declare a fast, a public fast, right? So the question is it what kind of battle is it? Like you're fighting, or as the Talmud says, right? Cherev shamru eino tzarich lomar cherev she'eino shel shalom, right? Elo afilu cherev shel shalom, right? Meaning, clearly, if there's a war going on, right? Everybody has to fast, right? Except for the soldiers, probably, right? Because we want them to be on target, right? But everybody else is going to fast because but that makes sense, right? That's easy, right? So why would you even have to tell us that? No, even if a sword of peace, cherev shel shalom, meaning exactly our case, right? Exactly this case of Egypt coming through. So he says, right, and the Talmud says, right, there was no sword of peace greater or more so than Pharaoh Necho, and even so, this is what was Josiah's downfall. Right? So they say, why did he? Right? Because Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, asks in that section of the Talmud, why was Josiah punished? Josiah was punished because he should have gone to consult with Jeremiah, and he didn't. He should have gone to consult with Jeremiah on this matter, and he didn't. So then comes the Talmud and gives us a little bit more detail about this, about what would have happened or what maybe did happen with the discussion. Maybe he went to Jeremiah and he didn't listen to Jeremiah. Because Josiah said as follows, right? In the book of Vayikra it says, Im b'chukotai telechu, right? Mm-hmm. If you follow my ways, v'natati shalom ba'aretz, v'cherev lo ta'avor ba'artzachem. Right? There will be peace in the land, right? If you follow my laws, then there will be peace in the land, and there won't be a sword. The sword won't come through your land. Oh. So again, if you're a Talmudic rabbi, what do you say? If there's peace in the land, then what's the sword have? Why is the sword coming through? Well, even according to this, if you have listened, then it's the sword of peace. Right? It's even another army won't come through your land to try to get to somebody else. And the problem was that Josiah thought that because that im b'chukotai telechu was being fulfilled. Is that following in God's ways was being fulfilled. And so he thought, great, this is not supposed to happen. This Pharaoh coming through. This prophecy, if it's going to be fulfilled, I have to go and stop it. Because clearly, everybody is fulfilling God's word, and so I have to go and stop this sword from coming through the land. Jeremiah says, or would have said to him, no, because you don't see what's going on. You don't see what's going on. Another midrash says that they would send around these policemen, right, so to speak, right, these constables to check, right. Josiah was trying to rid the land of Avodah Zarah, right. So the midrash says that that they would put a graven image on two halves of a door, right, and then they'd open the doors, right, and the people and the police who were Talmidei Chachamim, right, or wise people would say, it's not a graven image, just half of a something, right? And then they would leave, and they would close the doors behind them, and here you'd have this graven image for them to worship, right? I mean, again, that's the Talmudic hyperbole, perhaps, and it's spectacular. So what happens, right? Josiah thinks the generation is terrific. Jeremiah is saying no. And Josiah, as we know, is brought back to Jerusalem. Right? He doesn't die on the battlefield, he dies in Jerusalem. And there's a verse in Eicha, a couple of verses in Eicha, right? There's a verse in the first chapter of Eicha that says, Tzadik hu Hashem kipiu mariti. Right? It's 1:18, chapter 1, verse 18 of Eicha. The Lord is in the right, for I have disobeyed him. And Eicha Rabbah says, that's Josiah speaking. Right? Jeremiah, you were right. I didn't realize. I thought that this is that I was taking care of this, but I was wrong. And finally, for the purposes of this section, the Talmud in Tanit, right, that same section, has another conversation between Josiah and Jeremiah. And so the Talmud says as follows: and he says, when as Josiah's soul was exiting his body, Jeremiah saw that his lips were moving, his lips were saying something. Maybe he's saying something that's not, or maybe he's losing his life. He's going to say something. He's saying something crazy. He kofef v'shamauto shematzdik al atzmo et hadin. Listened closely and heard that last dying breath and saying, "Tzadik hu Hashem kipihu mariti." Right? God was right because I disobeyed him. And at that moment, according to the Gemara, Patach Yirmiyahu be'otasha behesped ve'omar ruach hapenu Mashiach Hashem nilkad b'shchitotam. Right. That's chapter 4 of Eicha. That's the eulogy. Right, chapter 4, verse 20. The breath of our life, the Lord's anointed, was captured in their traps. He in whose shade we had thought to live among the nations. Josiah was Mashiach. Right? Our friend Simcha's not here to get upset at me, but I mean he was anointed, right? I mean it's not the modern concept, or I'm not going there, right? But it's not that concept of Mashiach, right? He was the anointed one, right? He was God's chosen. He did what he did right. And he was brought down by his generation. Right? But he didn't. I mean, Josiah is the opposite of. I mean, and the Talmud views him this way. Josiah is the opposite of somebody like Ahab or Manasseh. Mm-hmm. Right? He did what was right, but he tried to push it too far. He thought that because he had the people doing the right thing, that he could really push the empire, right, and make Israel into an empire again and reunite the kingdoms and everything. But he couldn't. It couldn't be done. So that's Josiah's confession, right? I mean, it's fascinating, right? Because on the one hand, Jeremiah is absolutely contemporary. There's no question that Jeremiah is absolutely contemporary with Josiah, but they really don't have any interaction, right? And there's no criticism for Josiah's reform, right? Other than, don't think it's gone all the way. Don't think that they've gone all the way back. Josiah, don't be so naive, right? But he doesn't say that to him directly. So again, right, this is one of the reasons why I've found this book by Rabbi Lau to be so fantastic, is because of his breadth of knowledge, and I'm looking forward to the English version just so I can see which parts I misunderstood. But at this point in the book,
going to be coming out soon?
That's what they say. That's what they said a couple months ago. But I think they're putting the finishing touches on it. All right. So he now comes in the last section before we'll get into Yehoiakim. Right. Yehoiakim is this section that he brings is a little bit of a mishmash. Right. Or it seems like a little bit of a mishmash. Right. The title is the eulogy of Zechariah the prophet. the translation of Yonatan ben Uziel and the explanation of Rav Kook. Right? It's like, hey, wait a minute, okay?
Sounds like he's throwing everything but the kitchen sink in.
A little bit. Okay, so what happens? Right? Zechariah. Right? Again, we'll jump around again, right? Zechariah lives at the beginning of the Second Temple. Right? Zechariah, if I can find him here, in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 10 and 11, it says the following. Chapter 12, is that what I said? Yes.
That's what you said.
Thank you. All right, chapter 12, verses 10 and 11. I will fill the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem with a spirit of pity and compassion, and they shall lament to me about those who are slain, wailing over them as over a favorite son, and showing bitter grief as over a firstborn. In that day the wailing in Jerusalem shall be as great as the wailing at Hadad Rimon in the plain of Megiddon. Oh, interesting. All right, that sounds somewhat familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And at least the way Rabbi Lau writes it, which is fascinating, is it sounds like a riddle, right? It doesn't say who it was, right? It's a vision, right? We're sitting here studying Jeremiah and Josiah, so maybe we have an inkling because it says Megiddo, right? So there are multiple Aramaic translations on the Tanakh, right? Onkelos is considered to be the authoritative one for the Chumash, right? But according to the Talmud, right? According to the Talmud in Megillah, the translation of Yonatan ben Uziel is the proper one for Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi.
Mm-hmm.
And again, another midrash says that when Yonatan ben Uziel made these translations, the land there was an earthquake. Right? Why was there an earthquake? Because God got upset. Right? Yatzta bat kol va'amra. Right? The heavenly voice came out and said, "Who divulged my secrets to human beings?" And Yonatan ben Uziel said, "It was me. I did it." He said, "Who?" But you have to know, God, that I didn't do it for my own honor or for the honor of my father's house, but I did it for your honor, so that there wouldn't be dispute in Israel. Right? Meaning, I came to clarify what these books were talking about. Right? The cryptic nature of these books. And then Rav Yosef says, if it wasn't for this Targum of Yonatan ben Uziel, I wouldn't know what those verses of Zechariah meant. Right? What does it mean? On that day, the eulogizing in Jerusalem will be like the eulogizing of Ahab, who was killed, and like the eulogizing of Josiah. Right? So now Yonatan ben Uziel, right? You're still wondering why we're bringing this up, right? Yonatan ben Uziel is saying that's what's going on. So
and
now,
also said, the other thing that's a little confusing is that this has to do with my lack of knowledge in the area. The eulogizing of Achav and Josiah, it seems like what a contrast between the two of them. So that's one of the other things I was puzzling about. But.
Right. Meaning, well, that's the interesting thing about this, and that's why this next piece is fantastic. Right? Meaning, Yonatan ben Uziel takes the two places, right? Hadad, where's again in verse 11? Hadad Rimon is the person who killed Hadad Rimon ben Tavar Rimon is the one who killed Ahab.
Okay.
And Megiddo is where Josiah was killed, right? Mm-hmm. So both of these wailings, I guess, have resonance for the people, right? Meaning, they mourned Ahab, right? Ahab was not that unpopular, right? That's the problem, is he was too popular.
He may not have been righteous, but he was popular.
He's popular, exactly.
Folks. Okay.
Now along comes Rav Kook and says something fantastic, right? Rav Kook of one other verse before we get to Rav Kook, right? I think it's actually right after we read before in 2 Kings. I'm just saying it so that we have it, so we have the reference point. Right, in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 25, right? This is right after. This is not what we saw before about his death, about Josiah's death, right? In fact, this is right before that. Look what it says in verse 25. Right? V'chamo lo haya lefanav melech asher shav el Hashem b'chol levavo v'chol nafsho v'chol me'odo k'chol Torat Moshe v'acharav lo kam kamohu. There was no king like him before who turned back to the Lord with all his heart and soul and might, in full accord with the teaching of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. Right? Josiah was the guy. There was nobody better before him and nobody better after him. Period. According to the book of Kings. Right? And it's interesting because, of course, what do you notice in those verses? In that verse, look at the language. So
it's
the Shema.
Shema.
Right. Right, meaning I mean, not just he did right in the right Asaya Shar Beinei Hashem, right, or something like that, right?
It's actually, I'm taken by the next sentence right afterwards, 26. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn back from his fierceness of that great anger with which his anger burned against Yehuda on all accounts of all the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked.
Right. I mean, that's what we seem to have seen. That is that the majority of the punishment of the decree is because of Manasseh. Right. It's certainly not because of Josiah. Right. Mm-hmm. Meaning, were it not for Manasseh, the people wouldn't be worshiping these idols so much. Right. I mean, that's the point.
Right.
Right. So that's whose fault it is. Right. It's not that. Oh well, because I mean, if Simcha was here, he would tell us that parents aren't punished for the sins, children aren't punished for the sins of their fathers. Okay, good. They're punished for their own sins, but their father's the ones who started it.
That's right.
Right, and they just continued. Right.
Don't forget, it even says in Aseret Sedibros that righteousness I'll remember to 1,000 generations.
Right.
But that which is evil, pardon my lack of bad phrasing
sure,
will be remembered until the second, third, and fourth generation.
Right. I mean, we've talked about that in other contexts. I mean, what's really going on there also. Exactly. But meaning that does that still apply, etc. Right. Meaning was that broken by the golden calf? Anyway, that's another story. But I mean, this description is, I mean, it's conscious. I mean, that you don't use. Right, the Bible doesn't use words like that unless it means it, right? Mm-hmm. Unless it means to make you think of of the reference, right? Mm-hmm. That's the intertextuality of the Bible, which is just this is a simple level. It can be found on all kinds of deeper levels. Okay, so all right, so now so we see this about Josiah, right? Josiah is the best, right? But we also see, as you pointed out, this really interesting juxtaposition between Ahab and Josiah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now take a step back. And let's think about Rav Kook for a minute. Rav Kook made Aliyah about 2 months before the death of Herzl.
Okay.
He came, all right, and he came on Aliyah. He made Aliyah. He became the chief rabbi of Yafo. And he was asked to write a eulogy for Herzl. Now, of course, at the time, Herzl and the religious community didn't exactly get along. Right? They had some pretty deep disagreements and fights about Zionism, Israel. Right? Right? We know that. There's nothing new here. So Rav Kook wrote an article called "Hamisped B'Yerushalayim." Right? It's that line from Zechariah. Right? The eulogizing in Jerusalem, the eulogy in Jerusalem. And as he writes this, he goes through a very interesting idea, which basically says, from the moment of the division of all the brothers, we had a problem. Because really, right, we're Bnei Yisrael. Israel is everything, is all 12 tribes together. And all the characteristics and things that each tribe brings to the table. And Israel can't survive and can't succeed and can't thrive without all of them together. And so it was kind of that's why when David and Solomon kind of came together, right? Well, for the time of David and Solomon, things were great because you had the entire country united under
a king,
under the king from the house of David, right? From David and then Solomon,
exactly.
Right? And then it falls apart again. Rav Kook says Ahab was a great king, but his greatness was in his political and strategic knowledge and approach. He had nothing spiritual. That's Judah's, right? That doesn't belong. That belonged to the kings of Judah, but Ahab, in his own way, brought glory to Israel, right? He didn't do it in the realm of following God, but he did it in the realm of the people, right? He was a man of action. He was a strategically proper king. Josiah, on the other hand, was the opposite. Josiah was the spiritual king. Josiah had it all when it came to the spirit, when it came to the religious life. But he was no statesman. He couldn't make alliance properly, deal with international affairs, all these different things. That was not his strong point. And so he made this terrible decision to go to Megiddo to stop the Pharaoh out of a sense of pure spirit, right? Pure religious spirit. And Rav Kook essentially writes that these two elements need to be brought together in order for Israel to succeed.
Powerful statement.
And in the context of Herzl, it's spectacular, right? I mean, it's fantastic. It's an amazing thing because the religious community, you've got to imagine, the religious community wants him to totally say, the death of this, atheist, secular, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure, right? I'm sure he was getting pressure, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, again, Rav Kook is already, has certain of his thoughts, right? But they may not be fully developed yet, right? But he says, I'm not going to do that. Right? I mean, this is an element that appears in Rav Kook's thought all over the place, right? Of the secular Zionism being necessary, being a necessary component of what will make the state of Israel, modern state of Israel, a great place, right? The secular Zionist doesn't necessarily want his element either, right? But he viewed it as he viewed both of them as necessary, right? That Ahab could be a great king. And I mean, it's one of the most fantastic things to read, that this relationship between these ideas of what we're reading in Jeremiah and in Kings, right? I mean, we say Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, right, about the stories of the patriarchs, right? But here we see with Jeremiah and with Josiah, and I mean, it's fascinating, right? I mean, this is. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, right? I mean, this debate has raged on. We're sitting here in 2012. I don't know when somebody could be watching this years from now if YouTube stays in business. But we're sitting here in 2012. It's been 64 years almost since the State of Israel was founded, and this is not resolved. This debate has not been resolved. And certainly not resolved the way Rav Kook thinks it should be.
This is 600 before the Common Era, so it's been going on. It's been going on for 2,600 years.
Yeah,
plus.
Okay, but then the exile, right? I mean, it's meaning without a sovereign country, it's a moot point, right? Until you're thinking about resettling and everything else. But certainly for the modern state of Israel, this is an important question. Right? How do you balance these two things? I know I've said many times I'm not talking about the modern world in this, but I guess Rabbi Lau did, so I'll allow myself the luxury. But this is from the religious perspective. To hear Rav Kook writing that, to read Rav Kook writing that, is just out of this world, because he's just got a recognition that there's a place for both. Not so much that there's a place, but really there's something more. It's not that there's a place for both. It's not that he wants there to be an Israel, separated, and half of them being spiritual and half of them being,
No, but you can't. There has to be a blending of the two.
It has to be a blending.
You need spirituality. We all need that, but we all also have to live in the modern world, right. a part of world society, and that has to be handled intelligently.
Yeah.
Therein lies the crux
well,
of the matter.
this is intelligence. That's a problem right there, I guess. But I think he views it. I think Rav Kook viewed it, and perhaps, what we've read, Zechariah and the way the Talmud describes, Tan Ben Uziel and all these other things. I think what they're trying to say is, look at how each one of those fails, and then try to build a society that can merge the two. Right? Doesn't mean everybody has to be the same. Doesn't mean everybody has to be, doesn't mean everybody has to be religious or everyone has to be secular. It means that there has to be a society in which both of these elements are valued, and hopefully there are people who take both of those elements to heart in their own lives.
God, you look at that and you realize how far off the mark we are. That's something else.
Okay.
So depressed as Jeremiah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll conclude here for today, and God willing, pick up next week and see Yehoiakim, and the distinction with Yehoiakim is going to be very interesting. We'll start. You can, if you want to look ahead, it's chapter 22. Mm-hmm. Right? What didn't Jeremiah do the entire time that Josiah was alive? I know it's an open question, right? He didn't go to the Beit. We don't see him in the Beit HaMikdash, right? We don't see him going to the place where these things, where we would assume that the spiritual person goes, right? Chapter 22 makes a beeline, right? This is the beginning of the reign of Yehoiakim, sorry.
Yeah, I have to be careful
between
the two of
them,
because I forgot which one of the two. And I forgot if they were brothers or if one was the son of the other.
Right.
Because from one of them, if I remember correctly, God said from one of them, there's going to be no Davidic descent, as far as kingship is concerned. It was Yehoiakim. So there's one of them
right.
got the deep sea.
And actually, if I'm not mistaken, well, no, I probably am, so I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. Meaning, the other thing is that there's some names that there are some different spellings of names, right? So Yehoiachin and Yechoniyahu are the same, if I remember correctly. And I'm not sure, I don't remember what the relationship with Yehoiakim is. But anyway, that's where this goes, right? He's going to now come to the temple and to the king and to the center, because now he's done with the people. Now, right? We'll see what happens. So we'll leave you in suspense for now. All right. Good night.
Good night.